Hi there. I'm with my friend Willow Pryor. Now, Willow and I have known one another for 10, 15 years, something like that. Willow is one of these wonderfully sort of shamanic types in my world. She holds various spaces and flows very seamlessly between them. Willow's had her nose in my book on Neohumanism, Yearning and Becoming, and she's going to interview me about some of the things that arose for her. And of course, I'm trusting to her own native wisdom, actually, to take us on a journey. I don't know where we're going, but I'm going to hand it over to you, Willow, with a big hug and a thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. It's always a pleasure to share space with you. And wow, there is so much in this book. So, as we were saying before, this is a conversation and it is going to be emergent. And I think that's one thing we do have in common,
Yep.
that we agreed before, that is a place that we feel semi-comfortable. I mean, it's not about being completely comfortable, is it?
No.
Well, there's skins to be shared, and I'm going to start with something that came up for me when I read it, and I think it's this word neohumanism. And what is this? So we've got neohumanism, yearning and becoming, and look, everybody, look at my lovely my little yeah, I was saying to Marcus, I went through this book about a few months ago, but I wanted to refresh, and I came up with a few questions. And look, in that process, I have managed to lose those glasses again, but I'm going to grab them.
Neo. Neo does cause some kind of cognitive issues for people. Because of course you get neo-Nazis and so on. So we've got a whole bunch of neoliberals, and suddenly, what's this neo-humanism stuff? Well, essentially, if you think about the movie The Matrix, Neo in The Matrix, he's called Neo because he's new, which is what in Greek Neo means. So when Sarkar, who coined the term, came up with it, he uses language to explore consciousness and the way it works culturally, because consciousness is grounded culturally in your lived experience of the world, mine, everybody else's who's listening to this interview, and so on. So he'd been talking from the very beginning of his time as a public speaker, guru, philosopher, and so on. He'd been talking about universalism and this concept that we have a universal consciousness and we're embedded and flowing in that. And as he developed this, he developed the kind of framework for looking at, well, what is it that the West offers us in terms of understanding reality, and what is it that the East, India, China, the non-West, you might say, the indigenous too, have to offer? And do they in some way meet? And in what ways, when they meet, do they create possibilities for new forms of consciousness? Now, we're seeing this a lot now with the emergence of indigenous consciousness, indigenous philosophies, and people working across those into Western philosophy and so on. So we're getting some really rich encounters, I would call them. So Sarkar, having a very historical mind, recognized that in humanism there was this aspiration to see everybody as part of one human family, that we are all in it together, and that humanism ultimately was a critique of localism, geo-sentiment, socio-sentiments, which are sentiments related to class or caste or ethnicity, nation state, and those kinds of things. So he saw that humanism was an attempt to push back at that, and it goes back 500 or 600 years in the Western philosophical tradition. And he said, what we really need to do is we're imagining a new form of human out there, being human but in an ecologically, spiritually conscious way. So that no longer is it that there's a one human family, we're actually part of one conscious family where everything is part of my world and me. I'm ecologically, you might say, using modern terms, entangled in the
Mm,
world.
mm,
And that entanglement means that new forms of ethics and, I guess, moral considerations around relationships, distributional stuff, how the exploitative nature of modern Western capitalist culture, all those things become much clearer because we can see them through a lens that is entangled, ecologically bound, and so on, which means that we have a new form of humanism, the gifting of Western humanist traditions with a breakdown of the separation between the anthropos, that's the anthropocentric nature of I'm a human being and I'm allowed to go and eat that cow or chop down that tree or dig up that mineral or whatever it might be,
mm,
to actually I am related to or involved in the kind of conscious living and geophysical flows that make up the world that we inhabit. So neo-humanism grew out of that thinking. And of course, what happens is that somebody gives an idea to the world and then other people run with it. So I'm running with it and saying, what are the implications for me? I'm a cultural person, historian, musician, poet, meditator, spiritual is part of my core identity.
mm,
How do I take a concept like that and make it work? That, in other words, how does it have effects in the world around me, in the way I live, but also in the way I teach, so that I can pass this on to others. I can write that little book up, you get it, and you go wherever you go with that book, because as soon as somebody else gets an idea, it's no longer my idea, it's our idea, and you can do whatever you like with it. Does that help?
mm. Yeah, it does help. And I found it myself going through the book again in the last couple of days. Uh, just really landed with me how relevant it is for now, these
Mm,
times.
mm,
And also for me, just that parallel, because I had been working and you were supporting me and mentoring me last year with looking at this, we're weird, from this very Western educated, industrialized, rich democratic psychology, and then, what happens if we move towards more wild of being rewild, interconnected, liminal, deep futures
mhm,
people. And
mhm,
so it felt like neo-humanism really addresses um, that way of being and where we need to head
yep,
towards, and what are the wayfinders, what are the markers here. And
mm,
I've got my book open and I just love this word neo-humanist pheromones. It makes me like sniffing out and
yeah,
wayfinding, like yeah. It's almost like our body knows, our heart knows, and I know you go into some of that in
yeah.
here. Yeah.
Well, that's the future senses framework. That's where, we as cultural beings are attracted through cultural mechanisms, drawn into the world through cultural mechanisms.
Mm.
As if, let's say, if I was a non-human sentient being, a bee, a butterfly, a cow, like go back, or the kangaroo or whatever, I would be using all the five senses, particularly, and I would never discount the fact that there might be intuition as a sixth sense, even for non-human beings as well. But I'd be using those five senses to navigate, to wayfind, to manage the world around me. As cultural beings, surrounded by books and all that sort of stuff,
Mm.
I need, and I have been given by the world, by the growing, evolving human culture, tools for managing the way I navigate. And for me, one of those tools is the metaphor. So the
Mm.
pheromone, for me, of course, it's a metaphor. But what does it do? Well, it speaks to the fact that within cultures, we are drawn and pulled this way and that by all the attractions that we're surrounded by. So the future itself invites me to engage with possibilities beyond what's happening right now in me, around me, in my culture, in my world. So the future is emitting certain kinds of pheromones. Now, pheromones are neither good or bad. You know, you obviously pheromones, we often think of them in terms of sexual attraction and so on. But beyond that, pheromones are what mushrooms and flowers emit. They are calling, they're attracting certain things, but also fear, terror, anxiety. These are pheromonal biological products as well. They're hormonal, and anything that's hormonal is excreted on our skin, our breath, you know, our whole. And of course, if you're thinking spiritually, we're also projecting a vibe, you might call it. I love that word, the vibe. But you know, we are projecting these things into the world, so we can attract fear and anxiety, or we can attract optimism, hope, and so on.
Yeah, beautiful. And there are so many places we could go from there. But I'm going, you know, what is drawing me? What is the pheromone
Or in the driving seat.
Yeah, pulling me forward right now. So fortunately, I know where to go and what's calling me in. And I think it speaks to that yearning, you know, and also why yearning is so important at a time when there is so much change happening. I actually, and what's speaking to me right now, I actually in the article that I wrote, Wild Feminine Futures, I've got, because it leads us back to ruins of the future. The liminal can ignite longing, the sense that calls us into the world and fundamentally involves a spiritual urge towards connection. So
Perfect.
yeah, let's sort of, because there are so many wonderful chapters in this book, and I do really want to make our way back to that sort of education and why Neohumanism. But right now, let's move towards the ruins and the pheromones the ruins give off, and why accessing yearning and longing is so important of this time when it's so easy. And you know, I want to say individually, but it's never individually. Like, I'm very much reminding myself right now and those around me that whatever pain I may be experiencing or others are experiencing, this is a collective. The pheromones are in the culture. They're in the culture. And I know that there are 5 senses that you've outlined in this article. It's navigating the ruins of the future. But yeah, let's focus on why yearning is such a powerful one at this time.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's so timely that you asked that question. It's timely because I'm actually working on lectures and processes around yearning, but it's also timely because if we think about the way we inhabit culture, okay, there's something happens in culture, I think, that we respond to as a species. So you're right, it's not about me as an individual. I'm a member of a species, and a species has a certain logic. If we look at any species, any life form, of course it needs to reproduce, it needs to find food to sustain itself, it needs to protect itself and so on. And these are things that human beings do too. But there's a species logic that's involved that keeps each species coherent until it hits a threshold where it becomes incoherent. Maybe it becomes extinct, or maybe evolves into something slightly new. I've been fascinated for decades with evolution and how it works, but I don't see it simply in biophysical terms. I also see it in cultural terms. which is why I wrote that article using the metaphor of the ruins.
Okay. Yeah.
So we were talking about Sarkar's use of the term neo-humanism. Humanism has been a central pillar of Western empiricist, scientific, and the humanist aspect of, you know, the liberal arts and so on as well, for 500-600 years. We inhabit a world where certain principles of humanism are just taken for granted. We're unconscious of them. They shape our legal system, our educational system, our interpersonal relationships, right down to the very cells in our body almost. So culture is like that. Culture is built into language, the social forms, gender relationships, ethnic relationships, the human nature relationship, all of those things. We inherit those things. So we're actually living always in elements of the past that sometimes they're concrete, like you might go and visit an old cathedral or something, but or if you're indigenous, it's the land itself, where that hill or that tree or that brook or river or whatever it is actually part of the past in the present, and it will be in the future as well. So we inhabit ruins. And, you know, I use in the article that fabulous painting from the German artist Friedrich, who, that one where you've got this gentleman wearing this very, you know, dapper suit and everything, looking out over the wild. So he is the cultural element within something else. So what I see is that culture is the ruin. We're living in it now, and we're navigating it, because what we get from humanism, neo-humanism, from experiences of other cultures and their paradigms, indigenous, Indian, whatever, that feeds into foresight. It gives us, using Pollack's term, the image of the future.
Indeed, yeah.
That and then that image acts as an attractor. So think Futures Triangle, the pull of the future at the top there. The Futures Triangle is an attractor. So we go, okay, if it's an attractor, what does the attracting? Well, I'm using the metaphor of the pheromone.
Indeed,
And
yeah.
to me, the pheromone, we are attracted both positively and negatively. So fear acts as an attractor, because we're going to assume certain things about the future if you're living in a fear paradigm. Anxiety, stress, you know, the world's out to get us, you know, it's a me or them, a dog eat dog, all those kinds of things. Or it's something that calls us to actually respond to the best of our human beingness to that. That's where voice comes. So that's the third future sense, where we start to articulate my response to the call. What is it that calls me into the world? And of course, I am called, but also our species is here and being called. It's a collective thing. We're so deeply entangled. And if we start building and honoring our voice, what happens? Well, you become optimistic. Optimism is a muscle, it's a verb. It's something we do if you're conscious of it. Otherwise, it could be pie in the sky, sort of ostrich with your head in the sand, sort of, you know, and denying the world. No, the kind of optimism I'm thinking about is the optimism that takes us into the world constructively. And we build the world in the image of what we're called to. The world is more loving. It's trusting. It's also generative and creative. It's mysterious. These are the things that I think human beings ultimately yearn for. As a species that have become cultural, we became cultural because the physical senses were not enough. Something was happening with the hominids over the last few million years. Not just human beings, Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalis, you know, we have so many hominid cousins, and they've all kind of conflated, and it looks like we've come out as the winners, but it's not so much that. It's more that we absorbed elements from one another and have become this Homo so-called sapiens. There's not much sapiens around necessarily. That means wisdom, but you know, we do our best, right?
Yeah.
So the yearning then is like the thread that runs through that whole process, and it is what, to me, is ultimately the generative force within evolution, cultural evolution particularly. But I would say, because I'm quite interested in the work of Lamarck, who was a peer, who was working at the same time as Darwin, who talked about what attracts us leads to certain biological outcomes as well. So he saw the giraffe's neck stretching because it wanted to get further and further up the tree, sort of thing. Kind of a crude way of understanding it, but it's still about yearning. If you want something, you know, as a species level, then things will start to happen. That's the way I kind of see it. So I'm seeing it as a poet. I'm seeing it as a creative, intoxicated with mystery kind of guy. And I'm trying to anchor it in, obviously, an academic kind of space to say, no, it's not just me making some story up. There's huge amounts of evidence all over the place for the power of these senses in shaping the way we navigate the world, and particularly the incredible centrality of yearning. It energizes everything.
Yeah, yes. That just came to me then, and I was like, so where does, because I know you've used a lot and you talk about in this book, you know, how activating our senses, learning, understanding. I'm going to read a little section here that's in this article, and it talks about, you know, a trigger for emergence and the swarming of possibilities and of life-affirming action. And you say, I use dance as a way to unleash the energy of individuals and groups. For me, to move our bodies as part of future activities is to hack the codes that bind us and hold us in ruins that are not of our own making. So you go on to say, as beings who inhabit the ruins of the future, it is easy to feel lost, disoriented, and vulnerable. In my work, I first seek to get people back into their bodies. After all, it is our bodies who do much of the heavy lifting in the world. It is our bodies that carry the wounds, emotional, spiritual, ethical, that then manifest as illness and decline as we age. And then you go on to sort of posit that, you know, in a more sort of collective, dominant, you know, conditioning. And you know, it really sort of is why these future senses are so important. And how I suppose, what comes for me is like, well, how do we activate them? You know, whether that be through storytelling, whether that be through dance or embodied practices, much more able to, I think, this is not exactly from your book, but we can not only overcome the conditioning to just follow the map, but as this is from my article, but as Bussey suggests, to also play with it, to dance for the aliveness, the meaning making, and the co-creation that this framework offers us as a path towards shedding old skins and liberation. You know, that sense of being liberated and shaking off these ruins.
I mean, to go back to that very first statement about dance, I use dance, one, as a metaphor. So we dance with ideas, we play and so on. But I also very seriously engage with dance physically. I'm part of a movement called Interplay, which gives me a whole bunch of tools which have been crafted and tested over decades now. And of course, like we were saying before, with any idea, as soon as the idea reaches somebody else, it takes on a new form, you might say. So I play with Interplay in certain ways that are very much linked to to that description of challenging or hacking conditioning. I find that if you get people in a group and you get them to move in very simple ways, just walking, stopping, doing a bit of running, and you put on some music while that happens, and then you stop, and then you start, and then you stop, and you start. You're creating something like a punctuated equilibrium thing that, you know, they talk about in evolutionary terms, but something happens there, and all I can say is it's like magic. And of course it is pheromonal, because people are having fun, so they're also being shaken out of the kind of body dullness that we all carry with us. You know, well, let's say they come to this workshop, they've been in the car for half an hour, dealing with traffic, probably listening to some rubbish on the radio, or maybe a really good, you know, TED talk or a really good podcast, but their mind and their bodies have been separated.
Yeah.
So you bring that back together, and then of course you can throw in a futures question. What do you yearn for? Or how would you like your children to remember you? Or grandchildren, great-grandchildren? You know, any kind of question. And it evokes different kinds of responses once people have returned. Because it's so much of the work we're doing now is about returning, remembering, reinventing. You know, that little bit is really very, very important. So rewilding. How many ways can that be understood? Of course, multiple ways, because the context in which we talk about rewilding or re-educating or remembering always varies. So that means, what are we called to do, Willow? How do we respond to that call? And I'm thinking in terms of, you know, that there are different forms of, we're all wired to respond differently to that call. Some people, you know, are going to fight for human rights. Other people are going to fight for nature. Other people are going to meditate. Other people are going to create beautiful art or music, or maybe really angry art, punk type stuff, you know, the rage that was in punk in the 1990s and so on. That was, you know, so these are all legitimate ways, but we're called differently.
Yes, and if we bring it back to that neo-humanism perspective, I loved actually your prologue, Catching Fire, a neo-humanist love story. But, you know, initially you spoke of neo-humanism is really relational. And I think we, you know, because this narrative of that only the intellect is of value, not the embodied wisdom, then, you know, it's coming from the head. But when we understand that, well, we also, it's not only about relationships, but internal relationships. When we reconnect and we have a relationship and we relate to our whole being and our body and activate it in whatever way is possible, then we're activating and being able to come back to that love. You know, you say we are because of others, the human, the non-human, and even the inanimate. We exist only in relationship. Our becoming is relational in nature, and so that is externally but also internally.
We live with a world that divides things. So internal, external, we think they're separate.
Yes, that's exactly.
It's a total illusion.
Point taken, you know. Yeah, it's like, yeah. So you speak about, you know, we deal with the core problems facing today in schools. You know, it's in a secular world where spirit is shy and retiring. And for me personally, very much, dance and story and movement has been a practice and practices that I've engaged in for a number of decades now. And it is true that, well, I activate an aliveness of what it is to be human, and connect with myself, and thus, naturally, as you just pointed out, with the greater.
Mm.
And there is something very, then I can honor the sacred. And I think when, when there is so much pain or disconnection going on, people say, well, why should I be happy? Why should I dance? Or this is the time we need to really experience the deepest joy, because then we know what we're fighting for, or what we need
Beautiful.
to move forward. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, the sacred.
Yeah. And to me, dancing on behalf of the sacred, for instance, is an act of resistance
And yeah.
to a world that is crushing us.
Mm,
And
100%.
it's a conscious cultural effort on the part of an elite, I think, of people who have stakes in the game that are going to make them trillionaires, like Musk and people like that. That of course, Musk isn't sitting there like some evil kind of Sith emperor out of Star Wars going. He's following a misguided yearning. Yearning gets misdirected all the time, and if you can only yearn materially, you're going to amass a quantity of material stuff to confirm and try and meet that yearning, but it's never enough. The whole point of yearning is that no matter where we get, there's always going to be yearning for that next bit. Because we're yearning for something that's beyond reach, in a sense. The sacred. How do we access the sacred? What does it even mean to say, I yearn for the sacred? Oh, you're a mystical person, or you're a mystic, and I love reading mystical poetry and all the rest of it. It really affirms me. But it's becoming. It's always a becoming. And, if you're a materialist, the becoming is how many millions of dollars do I get in the bank? Where am I in the organizational pyramid? How far up am I hierarchy wise? Whatever it is. But all of that is misguided yearning. It's like unrequited love. Oh, I really wish that, such and such would just see me for who I am, that unrequited love stuff is, to me, it's a symptom of, misdirected yearning, but it's also a symptom of spiritual. I would say, at some level, if you read the great mystical poets, they all suffer from unrequited love, but it's love of the divine or the sacred, or however you want to frame that. Whichever, whether you're within a religion or whether you're outside of it, doesn't really matter. It gets framed culturally, of course. So the beautiful Sufi poetry of, Rumi, who's a classic example of the magic of unrequited love when it's directed towards something beyond the material.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, that to me is such a big question. And, we could run an entire podcast that lasts for years. It's a bit, the On Being stuff is a bit like that podcast On Being. I think Krista Tippett is exploring, in many respects, unrequited love. And to me, love is what it's all about. It's an organizing principle. It makes sense of things. It's self-organizing, actually, because it's relational, it's dynamic, it's never fully satisfied. There's all of these elements to it, and I think ultimately, when we think about the themes of this book, that right at the heart of the book is love, not within the kind of romantic, egotistical traditions of the West, but as the primary driver for everything we experience. So when we have violence, it's because we are brokenhearted. We are no longer sustained in loving relationship, and the only way we can try and keep things under control, that's the key word, is by dominating. So we can see that in the world of Putin, or Netanyahu with the Israelis in Gaza. We can see it with Trump, but we can see it with very small communities who are sovereign citizens, or they're all trying to hold on to something or make the world fit a certain formula that feels secure or whatever. But what we're dealing with is a world of broken hearts.
Yeah. And personally, how has neo-humanism been a balm for healing your broken heart? Because like we're saying, we've all had broken hearts, and it's like, but what is the balm that that we use?
The balm is and it's a very interesting question. The balm for me is something to do, and there's no real answer to this. So I'm sort of making a proposition. For me, it's about feeling held. I'm held by this world. If I want to say God, divine, the sacred, that's cool. But I can also just say I'm held by this world.
Beautiful, beautiful.
And that means that there's something there that just takes me down, and what happens. Life happens, relationships come and go, parents die, sometimes children die, friends die, I'm going to die, all of it.
Yeah.
And I'm held. And then for me, I make music and dance and words and poetry about that heldness, because I really want others to feel held.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, that really speaks to me, and it's really timely. Actually, we spoke before about the beautiful podcast, The Emerald, and I listened to the latest one the other day, and it was about collective burdens. And very much, we've been talking about, well, this Western world being premised on individualization. And when we come, and act and be in the world from that worldview, then we carry so much, there is so much weight, whether it's the death of a loved one, or the weight of what is happening on the planet, or even that, we think we are holding it ourselves. And so it was really interesting, when do we come back to that, from that entangled worldview and understanding of this web of life, then we too can be held. It is a collective, but can the world hold us?
Yeah.
So, and that was it was the other day, there was part of me, even just hearing that, softened around something. Like, oh, yeah. So I think that's a beautiful place to finish. But I think there is a beautiful page that you need to read. Yes.
You mean I have to find a copy of my book? Where
Yeah, can you find it?
I've got there it is. What page do you want me to look at? And we'll finish with the reading.
It's a hard choice, and now I'm going, well, maybe I'll let you decide whether it is. I was going to say I have a secret place.
The poem.
Yes.
What page is that on, Willow?
That is just before references, so 184.
Down the back here, okay. It's probably a good one, actually. Yeah. It's quite long. You ready, everybody? I want to thank you first, Willow, because what we'll do for dramatic effect, I'll read it and then we'll just end with silence.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
what we'll do is I'll read the poem, but I do want to thank you. It's been a terrific conversation, and as I said to you a few times now, we can have other conversations like this because I think you and I get something out of it, but the listener will also get something out of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think, look, there's still a couple of tags, particularly around education. So thank you very much, Marcus. It's been really rich. And yeah, I'm honored to have this conversation with you. And it may also, just to anyone who may be listening, maybe this be an opportunity to get comfortable, just to put your pen down if you've been doing dishes, if you've been driving your car.
Yeah.
You may not be able to stop, but if you can, let this sink in a little bit. It's a beautiful poem and there's a lot of richness in there. May it be a balm for your day.
Thank you. Thank you, Willow. Okay. So, I have a secret place. Delight, pure and simple. Delight in skin and touch and breath. Delight in the sense of being in the world, crafted from it and falling ever into it. Delight in knowing this is like falling in love. Each time unique, yet always falling, always the knowing. Ah, yes, this is me falling again. The excitement of the fall and the grace that comes, the grace of witnessing and memorializing, the grace of being in it up to the neck, the certainty that this is real and yet always the falling into and beyond, the sense that tells me this is real. No understanding at the heart of that understanding. No knowing at the heart of knowing. So it must be measured, assessed in units of delight, laid out like a cloth of unknowing, and cut, folded and shaped into intent, held close so as not to be lost, a suit of being and becoming, the folding and laying out of me that comes with the falling and the glorious surrender, like being tumbled by a wave of all froth and foam and giddiness and giggles and salt and tears, laid out like a shroud of becoming that measures the muscle and membrane and memory of the one contained in the shadow of flesh, the delight tasting cup that held me close for a moment in this open cosmos, in which I float and sing and laugh and cry bitter tears. Delight is what it is to be part of this story, all of it and the least of it, forever searching for the next seduction, forever yearning for completion, yet intoxicated with separation, all lonely with it, all longing and longing and longing to start and finish, to breathe and expire, to wake and sleep. Cosmopoesis is the delight in all this, the eternal falling into being that carves memory into bone and promise from tomorrow.